Just make sure Joe's good. You good, Joe?
I think we're good. So
Toast.
I thought fire marshals had clout because they had like these beautiful calendars they sell with like so much.
What was your name? Dean. Make sure we circle back on that, because I think what we're going to talk about is going to be a really nice segue into that. And with this group, I think everyone's probably got some experience, but I've got some thoughts on that. So make sure I don't forget that. My name is Wade Thomas. I'm an attorney. Don't hold that against me. Steve looked at me on the agenda because we're going to loop Steve into the back end of this. We were on a call, 2 days ago. We get fired up about this, right? And the agendas is a big one. So we're going to loop back on that. But Wade Thomas, I'm an attorney. This is my partner, Jeff. We do tons of land use planning and have done tons of land use planning. I hate to say this, but collectively we have over like 64 years of legal experience between the two of us. So
I know, shocking that we don't look that old. But
I've also done development, really development focused the last 5 to 6 years, also as a principal. So I've underwritten deals from the ground all the way to finished lots. So I'm a dirt guy. I love dirt. Who was the joke I heard earlier?
On the marketing side, I always tell people to get their attention. You want to see some dirty pictures?
So I'll let Jeff introduce himself.
So Jeff Warr, and Wade and I we both have a lot of experience. We've worked together previously in-house positions. We've both been general counsel and in-house for large real estate development firms, both in this area and in Boise. We kind of just decided a while back that we were tired of kind of the more traditional, way that we had done things. Whether that's both been from a law firm standpoint, because we both have done that, the large law firm, but then we've both been in-house with real estate development firms. And that really is a lot more fun because you get to be like a lot more hands-on than being the attorney that somebody calls at a large law firm. And they're like, okay, first off, what's your rate and how much are you charging, per hour? And okay, based on that, then I want you to look at this little aspect. Well, I need to understand some other parts of it. No, that's not important. I can't afford for you to understand the other parts of it. I just need you to look at this one little piece. And it's like, okay, I get it. But so what we did was after we decided kind of to make some changes, then we kind of went a different model. We're basically a virtual firm. Our firm is called On Demand General Counsel. And the reason that we called it that is because that's kind of what our background is, but that's the way that we like to act, to be able to be a part of your team as opposed to just, your outside attorney on doing things. We're both Salt Lake and Boise, and it's been a good move for us. So we're excited. We love it when Steve calls and asks us to be able to do some of this stuff. And when he told us what he wanted to talk about as far as, how you negotiate relationships with cities and some of the things that we're requesting, we're like, oh man, do we have some good stories on that. So I was reminded of one thing when Steve was showing the software and we were looking, at that map. And it was interesting when it was kind of pulled back a little bit. And you could see the surrounding states as well. And looking at the type size of the different cities, Albuquerque was in great big font, and Las Vegas was in great big font, and Salt Lake was actually kind of in smaller font. And it reminded me of a conversation that Joe and Steve and I had recently as to why in some of the experience that you've had and in other markets, do the attorneys really seem to get more involved in the planning process in other markets than maybe they do, in the Wasatch Front? And we had kind of an interesting conversation. I don't have any complete basis for this, but it reminded me when I looked at that map that the Wasatch Front is kind of a unique market. just as far as looking at all of the different jurisdictions and all the different cities that you're working with. You know, you look at like Albuquerque, the reason that it shows up in such a big font is because the population of the Albuquerque is much larger than the population of the city of Salt Lake City. Same with Las Vegas, it is. Yet from a metro standpoint, we're much larger than both of those markets. And so what you end up getting is you have seen a whole bunch of little towns that were developed and settled by the pioneers, that this is all grown together into one major metropolitan area. But you still have each of those smaller cities that you have to deal with, and they all do it just a little differently. So, you know, if I'm doing something in Albuquerque or I'm doing something in Las Vegas, I kind of know what the rules are a little better because I'm always working with the city of Las Vegas. But when you're here, you know, you're working with so many different smaller jurisdictions that sometimes it gets a little difficult to know that, oh, I forgot I just crossed the line from Lehigh into American Fork, and they look at it this way, and they look at it and they do it this way. And so as a result, it kind of creates a little bit of a different dynamic. But, you know, Steve had asked me that, and that's kind of my view on maybe why you see a little more mom and pop approach at times here, because you're not working with one large municipality in many situations.
Yeah, and I think I would add to that, kind of the impetus behind this conversation is all of those little towns and municipalities have had this incremental growth, right? And they just simply have not been able to keep up, whether that's fire, whether that's sewer, water, everything is strained. And so the ask over the last 10, 15 years is, we want you to pay for everything, right? And we're consistently burdened. The projects are burdened and burdened. I want a lift station. I want you to upgrade the sewer. I want you to do all these other things. And that's kind of that dichotomy between those two. And I get that, but you can only burden a project to a certain level. So that's really been what's happened is they just don't have the financial resources and the planning mechanisms. And I would also probably say the sophistication to even deal with a lot of those issues. So they make it our problem. And so that's kind of, we wanted to talk about how do you kind of reset that playing field, because they often take the position, it is your problem and you've got to figure it out. And I would argue we don't.
Yeah, exactly. So kind of what we want to talk about today is give you some basic understanding. I'm going to start out just by kind of explaining what the legal basis is and what the courts have said regarding what a city can do and what they can't do when you go in and you apply for some kind of development. What can they require? What can't they? And like Wade said, starting to level the playing field. So when a city says, you know what, you go in front of them and here's what I want to do, and they're saying, okay, well, you need to build this road, or you need to upgrade this intersection, you need to dedicate land for a park or for some other kind of municipal public use, or this is where we see things going in the future, and so we expect you to, since you're at the beginning of it, to help us to accomplish that. And all of those have very real, it's real that they're allowed to do that, under the law to some extent. But you need to understand why and when they can do that. So I'm going to give you just a little bit of a law school course on what the basis is for that, because I think it'll help us in some of the case studies that we're going to look at in a minute. And I always have to have my Diet Coke when I do it. So Joe, I want to make sure you've got, I have a deal with McDonald's, product placement. So, because they do have the best Diet Coke. So, the taking clause, the Fifth Amendment of the United States Constitution has language in it that says, nor shall property be taken for public use without just compensation. Well, when the founding fathers wrote the Constitution and and then you had, future amendments to it as things started to develop and as we started to develop as a country. This was one of the things that they looked at. So what you have then is the court system, then is the system that we have in our country that says, okay, we're going to take all of these things and these rules and the things that different people do, and then we're going to try and make sense of all of it. And so they decide decisions based on specific cases and specific fact scenarios, and they develop then this long line of case law that then ends up governing the way that we work in relation to any, specific, the Constitution, specific laws, codes, those types of things. So this has been a really interesting one, and it has been something that has really had a lot of development over the last 30 years. There are a couple of U.S. Supreme Court cases that really are kind of just the preeminent cases that govern why we have ended up where we are as far as land use and taking cases when it comes to cities. What can they do and what can't they do? The first one is NOLA versus the Cal Coastal Commission, and the other one is Dolan versus the City of Tigard. The NOLA case was decided in the mid to late 1980s. The Dolan case was, I think, 7 or 8 years later. It was in the early to mid 1990s. And let me tell you just a little bit about the factual background for both of those cases. NOLA was a case out of California, and NOLA owned a home, which was kind of just a bungalow. It was a very small bungalow that sat right on the coast, sat right on the beach. The NOLAs decided that they wanted to knock that down and build a bigger house. Well, as a result of building the bigger house, then, it kind of started to obstruct views of the ocean for the public, from the roadway and those types of things. So the Coastal Commission, who actually was the municipal entity that was responsible for being able to permit all of this, said, okay, Knowles, we will let you build your bigger house, but in order to do so, you have to provide a public easement and access to the beach through your private property. And the NOLAs are going, well, just a minute, but I've never had to provide that before, and there's access other places. Why do we have to do this? Well, you're building a larger house, and so people can't see the ocean now, all of a sudden from where they could before. And so that ended up going through the court system and then ultimately to the United States Supreme Court. And the United States Supreme Court said, you know what? We get it that you can't necessarily see, have the exact same view of the ocean, the public can't, but requiring an easement so people can walk through, that's a different thing and doesn't necessarily solve the same problem. And so they decided, no, there is not a nexus or a connection or an actual connection for what the Coastal Commission is trying to accomplish and what actually happened, what actually has been taken away here. So that was the first case. Dolan versus the City of Tigard was a case out of Oregon that went to the ultimate Supreme Court. Yes?
And NOLA won?
And NOLA, yeah,
So
NOLA won.
Statute globally for land for those types of issues?
Well, it became the Supreme Court decision then, yes, and so it did govern. And we'll talk about in a minute what then ends up happening as a result of that. Because then all of a sudden, and we've seen it here in Utah lately with certain things as far as redistricting and stuff, the courts make decisions and then the legislature comes in and says, that's bull crap, we're not allowing this, we're going to change it, to change it this way. So we'll talk about what ends up happening lots of times with case law. Dolan and the City of Tigard out of Oregon, Dolan had a store that they wanted to enlarge, and then they wanted to increase the size and pave their parking lot. And This was another situation where the city was saying, well, in order to do that, and do you remember what it was on Dolan that they required?
I can't remember.
I think
what
it
was a road. I think it was a road.
Yeah, I think it was an access road. And the city said, well, we'll let you do that, but you're going to have to do this. Once again, it ended up going all the way to the United States Supreme Court. And the United States Supreme Court again sided with Dolan and said, City of Tiger, you're going too far in what you're asking for. There's not a natural connection between what these people have proposed to do with their property and what you are requiring of them and the reason that you're saying that you're going to do that. So that's where we get to this, a valid connection to the project, and that the demand of the city is roughly proportional in nature and extent to the project's impacts. Now, don't get me wrong. I mean, cities have the right to be able to look and see what kind of impact is this going to have, on our existing infrastructure, those types of things. So, for instance, Costco decides to come into, a market and build a new store. Costco generates a heck of a lot of traffic. So, there may be a very natural nexus and connection between the city saying, you're going to have to widen, this road, and you're going to have to put in a signal and these types of things, in order to be able to do that. There was an interesting one out of the Boise area, out in Meridian, where Costco did exactly that. The problem is the road that it was on needed to be widened for miles in order to do it. And so the question got to be, how much of them are we going to make them widen this, because of their impact on it, and how much of this is, it was Chinden, so it was a state highway. How much are we going to require Idaho Department of Transportation? Should they just have to be doing it themselves? Just because the way that you've allowed the growth to happen, and it makes sense for a Costco to be out here, but the connection from this part of West Boise to this part of Meridian, because the way you guys have planned it, that's not necessarily all of Costco's fault, So yeah, they should be able to and need to improve this part of it, but do they have to go the whole way? And so those are the types of things that they're looking at. So what happens, and going back to your point, is, okay, so the Supreme Court decides these things, does that make it the law of the land? Well, it does, until the legislature, then decides to come in and be able to do, the things that they want to do. And so what ends up happening is, as a result of that, the courts will give these much broader decisions, but that are based on a specific factual scenario of that case. And so then what legislatures do, and this is the way the system's set up, it's what they should do. What they do then is they take that and they think, okay, how do we then apply this to everything that we're doing, in general, so that we don't have another Supreme Court case, doing this. And so the states then, sometimes at the federal level, they'll do it depending on whose jurisdiction it is, and then sometimes at the state levels. So as a result of the Nolan and Dolan decision and this test that they came up with, the test being is there an essential link between what they're asking for and, was this reasonable and is it proper? The states then come in and make their own legislation, interpreting that, but of course always seeing how far can we go, in doing this. So like in Utah, for instance, you've got the Utah Land Use and Management Act that, applies, and as it's applied to municipalities, it basically takes that Nolan-Dolan test from those cases and puts it in code, in state code, which says municipalities, this is what you can do. So then what do the municipalities do? Then they adopt their state codes to make sure that, things are going on. But of course, especially when you get to the city code part of it, there's always a lot of, discretion, that's written into it. So that gives you just a little bit of background on, takings and how we kind of get to this point and what can cities do and what can cities not do.
So
Does this get us into the
yeah.
next one? Into
So
the case
I'll
study?
pick up
Yeah.
right there. So, all right, we're talking about constitutional law. What does that mean? How's that help me as a developer? The problem is you have these tests. So like proportionality. Well, I can't tell you what that is. I can tell you what it's not. So I'll give you an example. Project in Middleton, Idaho, 130 acres. There's a road on the east side, 30 acres, fine. Sewer flows fine. The 100 acres, it all flows away from where the lines are. So a developer comes in and says, hey, I'll put in a lift station. It's about a $500,000 lift. Not that big of a deal. We can take care of our 100 acres. City comes back. This is after about 6 months of negotiating and says, that's not the lift station we were looking for. What we're really looking for is a lift station off-site down by this major corridor. By the way, it's going to need an 18-inch line that goes about a half a mile up to this other line. It turned in to be a $500,000 into a $12 million offsite. The land wasn't worth that much. So I can tell you when it's not proportional, because that's super obvious, but that was a real live case. So this is a transition. I was going to walk through a project that was in Garden City, because it still says, well, okay, what's the city going to do? Well, guess what? They're going to say everything's essential and everything's proportionate, right? That's their position. Yes, we're asking for this road because your project is going to drive traffic and you should have to do right, or even fire. Like, yep, we're going to need all this other stuff. Go to the next slide.
And real quick, I just really
that
like
was
the
a
quote
really
from
good
the
quote.
Department of Commerce, and we'll talk a little bit near the end about the Ombudsman system, that we have in Utah, what it is, what it isn't, and but sometimes it can be something that can be very helpful to guiding smaller developers that don't have maybe the legal resources to be able to hire somebody to do the complete analysis for you. But one quote out of one we looked at is, they said, bargain for zoning or other forms of development are not a free-for-all for a local government in the kind of things that they can demand. And I think that really, kind of sums up what's going on and what they can do and what they can't do.
And I would add to that, a lot of times, you also have that difference of an annexation versus a project that's not annexed. These requirements still apply to them. It's not a free-for-all. They can't just ask for everything. Go ahead. So this is a project. So Steve mentioned agenda, and I thought this would be a good segue into this. I think where a lot of developers really kind of go wrong on their projects is they assume they're dealing with the all-knowing power, that everyone at staff and in the city council knows exactly what they can ask for, what's needed, and what the basis is for that. And I think it's also kind of back to that agenda. I know you guys have it here. You have this, hey, we're all about affordable housing. But are you? Because you're not. Or it's so many offsites that it's no longer affordable housing, right? So real life project, these are the slides from the city council meeting that I presented at. So nice project, 7 stories in Garden City. It's a nice little flag parcel you can kind of see right here. City wants a road. Well, this road obviously destroys this project, right? Because we need access to here to park it from the back. It's like 229 units, I think, 7 stories. This is a major road here. So it's got to come out this. So property was annexed and zoned for the desired use. Technically could be approved at design review, right? Staff takes the position, oh gosh, we're not really comfortable approving this size of a project. It's got had a lot of neighbors that were upset about it, but they were not comfortable. But their code said, no, this is the head of planning and zoning. This is your job. You can approve this project.
And let me clarify one thing on it. Why the neighbors were so upset, it had nothing to do with all of this. Pastry Perfection was the best bakery in the entire Boise
that's the name.
metropolitan area. And so I was pissed that they were letting it go. You know, that it was doing this. But I mean, let's talk about why the neighbors were really upset.
So
Nothing like it.
the dialogue with the city was, well, we've done all this planning. It's part of our comp plan. It's part of our transportation needs analysis. Now, a developer had already stepped away from this and got nowhere on the road. So this particular owner is like, I guess I got to go fight this, right? Yeah, you got to go fight it. So let's go fight it. Go to the next slide. So their position was, it's in the comp plan, it's in the transportation needs analysis, it's in the project tribal model analysis. I'm not going to go through all these. None of those documents supported requiring this road, okay? So the reason they want the road is about right here is 100 acres. And in Garden City, they literally are out of land. There is one farm of 100 acres, and then ITD, which is Idaho Transportation Department, owns this beautiful 1 acre parcel that at some point they want to do some type of city center or something like that. So this road doesn't even access that site. There are 3 other commercial properties that they at some point would have to pull that road through to provide access. Go ahead. So go back one.
Oh, did I? Oh, too far.
Yeah.
There we go.
So in all of the I'm saying this because you would assume it really would be in the comprehensive plan. It's in the transportation needs analysis. Like you would assume this was something that was heavily vetted out. All that we could find in the comp plan is that this is a future planning area. So I went back to the city and said, okay, what planning have you done? Nothing, cricket. So I did public records request. They had done this much planning for this site, but yet they're telling me this road is required for our project, or at least the right of way. But if I give them the right of way, I can't build on it. I lose the project. Go ahead. I'm going to kind of burn through these real fast. Transportation needs analysis. Again, it says if. So our site's right there. That's the ITD site. You got to still pull through 3 other properties. If it's ever redeveloped, then we need to look at this road. Then part and parcel to that is the city has the structural of what really is their documents. The transportation needs analysis, now we had to dig for this, is technically not part of their comp plan. So even if you could rely on this, it's not binding on anyone. It's definitely not binding on me. Go ahead. So this was kind of where we landed on this. So the only mechanism for dedicating a roads in Idaho is the subdivision process. This was not a subdivision. This was an application to build a building. But nonetheless, in any form, and this is what makes it important, it's a taking analysis. So we present this at the city council meeting. Staff's like, we're not touching this, but I kept kind of drafting these letters knowing, get it to the city attorney. That's my audience. I need to get to this guy. Nothing. So we go to city council meeting, do the whole presentation, and there's always the one city council member that doesn't want to approve anything. And he didn't want to approve this project, but he asked a question. He said, let's assume Mr. Thomas is right. What's going to happen? And the city attorney, I've never seen this happen before, says, Mr. Thomas is going to sue us. So that's your biggest weapon. Every city, every municipality knows about this. They don't like that, and they sure as hell do not want to get sued. So then the question was, would he win? And the city attorney goes, unequivocally, yes, he would win this. Okay? We got it approved. They stepped away. But that's what it took. But you would assume that you have an ally in city council, right? We're partners. Let's figure out how to develop. You guys are land and planning. We're the developers. Let's work in conjunction. But you would assume I should be able to rely on that, right? It should be in the comp plan. It should be in the transportation needs analysis. There's a travel model. I mean, there's a whole litany of things. None of it supported requiring that road. So I use that as an example. I think go to the next slide. So we use this as an example because obviously I'm an attorney, so I was just pounding them, right? But who has those resources? I mean, you're gonna bring an attorney in every single time you go and submit an application? No, it's just not practical. So we kind of wanted to use that as, what are the lessons and what do you do? So the lessons are, you may not be dealing with the expert, right? Well, Steve and I had this conversation. You get these city council members, they literally know zero about land use planning. When they come in, now you might have some senior guys. This particular city council, they had 2 guys that had been there for like 20 years. Those guys knew land use planning because they had kind of been in the trenches. But a new city council member, or even at a county, that's what they know, nothing. But even staff, which this transitions into the agenda, staff's really interesting because a lot of times they don't know. And this particular staff person had been there in 25 years. I think she genuinely thought that there was enough there that she could require this road, right? So you have that. And then I think you have personalities, a little bit of God complex. And then I think the third part is, we're part of the problem, right? I've done it. Yeah, I'll give you a road, I'll give you a path. Oh, you want me to throw in a tot lot? Sure, we'll do that. Whatever it takes. But I think the ask has been growing, right? And I'll go back to the sewer, the lift station. Those asks are getting bigger and bigger, and it's because they're constrained, and it's because we've created the precedents that will give it to you. And then the last part is, I think there's a huge disconnect. Famous saying in our firm and in the office is, it's simple math. The cities and the municipalities do not understand the financing of a project. They do not understand the impact of a $12 million lift station on a project, or even $500,000, or a $400,000 lane widening, or whatever that is. They do not understand that piece of it.
And I think to go along with it, and you had brought this up, can we talk about like the fire department and some of those things? You've got these other, you sometimes have internal fighting, within the city that they're trying to take care of. This one that the pastry perfection thing that Wade talked about, you've got that I can't think of here. Normally you have a situation where the cities are in control of the streets, and what they're doing. This one even had probably another wrinkle, and tell me if I'm wrong. There's one interesting thing that in Ada County, Idaho, which is, Boise Metro, years and years and years ago, they decided, let's take away the rights to, plan the roads and your oversight of the roads, take it away from the cities. And so they have a county highway district that handles not roads just in unincorporated, Ada County, but everything. The roads in downtown Boise are not controlled by the city of Boise. They're controlled by the Ada County Highway District. So you've got this additional funky thing that goes on. And at the time, when I did more practice up there, they're just a pain to deal with because they're not necessarily beholden to the city. So sometimes you have got these external forces as well that are coming in that the city's trying to balance, in some way. And ACHD is
that's a really good segue. So road on the north was ACHD. Road on the east was Idaho Transportation Department because it's a state highway. Okay, so that's a really good, so what do you do, right? What do you do when you're having these conversations? That's a really good example. Slow it down, ask the questions, make them prove it. The roads is a good one. I don't know how many times I've heard, well, ACHD, that's Ada County Highway District, really wants this. ITD really wants this. Oh, we talked to them. Okay, well, I want to have a meeting with them and you, right? Because they'll have a ton of meetings about your project and not invite you to them. Invite yourself to the meetings.
They'd love to force you through just the city and have that be your contact, and then we'll be the ones that'll deal over here. And
so another very similar thing in Meridian, Idaho, I called it the road to nowhere. And it was saying, well, we talked to ACHD. Okay, what'd they say? Well, they told us this. Okay, well, let's set up a meeting with them. Well, I don't know that we want to do that. Okay, well, then I'll set up a meeting with them. Do you want to come to it or not? So then the real question is, as you're slowing this down, what do you do on that particular one? And then in this one, start documenting it. Start putting it in writing, because you're driving to the taking analysis, right? At some point, you have to signal, hey, I'm papering this thing, right? And I hate to say lawyering up, but start papering it. Start writing letters. Just a follow-up. We had this meeting with ACHD. You were there or you weren't there. We said this, because I've also gone to meetings where both parties are there, and then a month later, no, that's not what we talked about. Well, that's weird, because I was there and we did talk about that.
So true, especially with AI now anymore. Just invite the AI to your meeting.
Yep.
And we've benefited immensely on callback, on having something on record. So when I was dealing with, for example, a vesting, and they were trying to tell me my vesting lapsed, I had an email that we made sure that everybody signed off on. We literally went out, and then they responded. We said, no, we need you to say we're good. Like, we literally needed in writing, we're good. It came back, we're good. Guess what happened down the road? We weren't good. And so then I had to bring the evidence that we were good.
Yeah.
They were like, oh yeah.
Yeah, or I would add to that, retrading. Like, no, we talked about 1 lane, not 5 of the new road. That's 2 different creatures. So at some point, and the gut check is when you're like, man, this seems like there's a lot of stuff they're asking for. That's your red flag, right? There's something inside of you that says, man, this seems kind of odd. Like, they're asking for all this stuff. That's what make them show you. So I literally, those slides were a byproduct of a number of meetings and follow-up letters where I kept saying, hey, I'm looking at your comp plan and it does not say that. This is what it says, nothing. And then it's the transportation needs analysis. Well, I'm looking at the transportation needs analysis. It doesn't say that. This is what it said with those highlights. The traffic project module, or whatever they called it, it didn't say that either, but I had documented. Never got a formal response on any of it, right? But I was creating the paper for the taking, right? And I was looking at this from, at what point, who's my audience? Your audience is gonna be the city attorney, right? Because he's thinking taking, right? They don't like to get sued. No municipality, no county, no city wants to get sued by any landowners. By the way, it's really rough to get reelected if you lose this lawsuit, right? And it can be expensive. But start to create that basis.
Assume worst case scenario from the very beginning, because what you don't want to do is feel like you've been having these good faith negotiations with the city, and then along the way you're seeing some of this stuff where it says, well, no, we didn't say that, or they're coming back with a requirement that it's like, well, that's different than what we talked about before. And now all of a sudden you're getting right up to close to the time for your approval or something, and you can see we've got a big divide here between where we are. There's a big gulf. And that's then at the point lots of times where then a developer may consult an attorney, and the attorneys, I can't think of how many times over the years I have said, oh, I wish you had come to me back then, because we probably could have done it. And the thought here is you start doing things to start creating that record. Just, I hate being a naysayer, but just assuming worst case scenario that, prepare for it going the absolute worst way, because it may, and if you're not ready for that, then now all of a sudden you have to go back and you have to recreate it all.
Now, I'll add, I'm showing you the worst case scenario, right? Where literally the city told me to go pound sand. And I had to take the risk and take it all the way to city council, not knowing whether or not I was gonna get the vote. Did we wanna sue? No, I don't know that we would have. But conversely, more often than not, when you start asking the questions and you start documenting, they're not all bad, right? A lot of them are sophisticated. A lot of them know the rules, the laws. They know where you're headed on this, and it does give you the opportunity to bring it back to the table and have some realistic conversations. But I think sometimes asking those questions, documenting it, sometimes that's what it takes to get them back in and get it reined back in. Because so much of that stuff's negotiated. Now, will you maybe give them stuff that they're not entitled to? Sure. Simple math. Can you make the deal pencil with it? Maybe not. But you have to know that it's not a free-for-all. They can't just keep cramming this stuff down.
And I want to highlight, and then I wanted Brian to have a second. He was going to say something. But I want you to understand, too, part of the things that you need to understand going on in the background is they are talking about your project when you're not around. 100%. Because they're seeing what your project does to their city, and then they're wanting to put together a new code or a new legislation to not have that conversation again, to what Jeff was alluding to earlier. So by right, your application date, as long as you keep it alive and moving, which is another way they politically try to slow you down on purpose so that you lose your application. But that application, they cannot, in these backdoor rooms, if they're doing stuff like, oh, we're going to change this or we're going to add that in, they can't do that. So if they start to sound like they're doing that, there's a sign, right? That's another signal that these guys are out of bounds.
So the cities, they definitely want you to follow the code, right? Like those are the rules. Well, they apply to them too. And that's what we've seen a huge shift where all these municipalities are revamping their comp plans and they're revamping their code. Okay, but today, when my application is filed, that's what the rules are. They apply to the city and they apply to you, but they apply to the city too. And they know that. Yes.
Yeah, do you kind of preempt that by kind of telling them bad news before you tell them that bad news? What I mean by that is, do you have to have these conversations with the city attorney, kind of laying the groundwork so that it already gets filtered and blindsiding them in a city council meeting?
So to answer that question, usually you've already had these battles before you get to city council. So this was a worst case scenario where I thought stuff was going to the city council or to the city attorney. I'm not sure he had seen much of it except for maybe the day before the meeting. Conversely, City of Meridian, it was like the fastest growing city for like 3 years in the country. They have 4 attorneys on staff. When you start to talk to them, they will loop in their attorneys. But at the same time, Bill Parsons, great guy. He's the head of land planning. He knows this stuff cold, and he knows what a taking is. Now, is he going to push the boundaries and what he asked for? Yes, 100% he is. But he knows what the rules are. Is he willing to ask for this stuff? Yes. If you're willing to give it to him, he'll take it. He also knows at what point they have to say, yeah, okay, we'll back off of that. So I think it varies, and I think it varies based on the sophistication. That we have some counties in Idaho that are absolutely impossible to deal with because they don't even have a county attorney. So that it kind of all depends on and I think that's the other thing is this is where I was going to go with fire. Don't let me forget to loop that back in. Getting in front of them, knowing who they are. I have the advantage. I get in front of a lot of cities. They know me, because I've been doing this for 7-8 years with multiple applications, multiple lots online, multiple approvals. So you got to know them. And I think there is some value if you're, Century? If you guys are going into a new county and you don't know anyone, go find a planner that does. I could pick up my phone and call one of the planners in Garden City on their cell phone and they'll take the call right now. So you got to kind of build those relationships. And I say that because that helps you kind of navigate how you approach those things and how you deal with them, and whether you're super heavy-handed with it or not. But it still goes back to my comment earlier of the gut check, right? Like, man, that seems like a lot that they're asking for. That's when you need to start thinking about this stuff. Are they really entitled to require that?
I'm just curious, so we're talking about it all being, in essence, not part of the planning or part of the comp plan. What if it is part of it? If there is parts of it that's part of this, the planning?
So I think you got to figure out what the parts are, right? And a lot of this stuff, so you look at the comp plan process, right? It's a 10,000 feet, right? And so you've got to really start to parse it out. And you have to you either have to become an expert or have someone on staff that's gone through the comp plan. What does it say? Pouring through. I mean, that's kind of one of the advantages of AI today. Like, dump that thing in the cloud. Just tell it, say, go find me this stuff. Tell me about roads. But also connecting those dots. So you have so that transportation needs analysis. Great example. You have the comp plan, but it sits over here, and it was a tool, but they didn't go through the legal process to make it part of the comp plan. Does that make sense? So it wasn't in their code. Like, their code says the city documents are this, the comp plan, and there was like 4 other documents. Guess what wasn't listed? Transportation needs analysis. My opinion, it's a suggestion at best. I'm not tied to it. So that's kind of I don't know if that answers your question.
Does that give them right for like eminent domain?
So the interest is a great question. So it was, does that give them the right for eminent domain? Yes and no. The problem is cities don't like that. They want you to give it to them for free.
That's
right.
They don't want that fight.
Yeah, I've seen very, very few eminent domain cases. But it does give them the basis to do it if they wanted. I mean, they could come and take it.
Yeah, and I think that, what we're saying when you talk about, the comp plan requires, this and this and this, but it still comes down to that Nolan test, that is codified in most places. Okay, fine. The comp plan at this 10,000 or 30,000 foot level, says this, and that this is what's going to be required, and this in general is what we're planning, with this area over here. But when push comes to shove and the rubber meets the road, you still have to look at it and say, okay, but you're asking me to do this, which, yes, has some consistency with the comp plan, but it goes then down even further when you're doing that analysis. But should I have to be the one to pay, for all of that and what's required in it? And the city will, say, well, the comp plan requires it. Okay, but it's a deeper analysis than
So
that.
a great example of that is the Costco example, right? I mean, those things have massive amounts. And so it goes back to that proportionality. So even if it's in the comp plan and all that, okay, my frontage road, I get it. I got to give you some lanes. Do I have to give you the next 5 miles? I don't know. Is it the next parcel over? Maybe. I don't know. Like, where's it? Because guess what? They're going to ask for 10 miles way out there. So I think that's knowing, okay, it's not a bright line rule on that kind of stuff, but that's that proportionality of and that's the difference of a Costco versus, a neighborhood with 10 lots in it. Should I have to widen the road 10 miles? No. Maybe if I'm Costco, but not for a subdivision of 10 lots. So
You talked about when cities are requiring things that may be excessive. I've run into scenarios where larger developers get sweetheart deals that may be in the development plan that doesn't seem consistent with what's in the code or what they're requiring of you. Can you address that? Have you run into those scenarios?
Yeah, so it was large developers, large builders. We have some in our in our neck of the woods that seem to get quote unquote sweetheart deals, right? Yes and no. I mean, they still have the same rules, but I'll give you an example. Lennar came in, couldn't get this project approved, and it was denied. And part of the discussion was with ACHD, our highway overlords, wanted a rotary. So Lennar lent them $4 million to build it, and they'll get the money back in 9 years. Could anyone else have done that deal? Probably not. Guess what got approved? their project that was denied at council. So I think it happens. I don't know how big you guys are. You guys get sweetheart deals?
But it really does come back to, again, under that same test, the proportionality.
Yeah.
And so, some of these big ones that, developers, sometimes they're able to get away with, with a little more on some things. And
I'll add to that, we have Corey Barton Homes, 55th largest builder in the country, is in Idaho. And he builds a ton of stuff. He owns thousands of acres still in the Boise Valley. He seems to get some sweetheart deals sometimes. But I would say that's 1 out of every 20 projects. The other ones, and they're to code. If he needs to widen a road, he widens a road. But I will say on most of his large projects, it's frontage. He's not loaning you $4 million to put in a rotary and get paid back in 9 years. So I don't know. Does anyone else have any feelings on that? Whether it seems like large developers. We've had a ton in the last probably 10 years. We've had all the big nationals come into the Boise market. And I will say they definitely have driven land prices up because they overpay for dirt. If they come in and buy finished lots, they overpay for finished lots. But man, they like to throw a lot of money around to get deals done because they have to buy into the market. So I think that's been the interesting thing that we've seen. And then, they stick around. We had D.R. Horton. Anyone hear from D.R. Horton? We had them come in and they were gone in 2 years. But they overpaid for dirt. They overpaid for lots. They were, doing these beautiful things that didn't seem like they penciled to me. But that's kind of what we see more as, man, it just...
And you have to remember that when it comes down to it, and we talk about, these tests and what can cities do and what can't they do, but they still have a lot of discretion, under the code and under the test from the Supreme Court, which has been codified, in most places. There still is a fair amount of deference that is given to cities by courts for discretion in looking at things as a whole, but it still has to be, reasonable. And so sometimes that discretion, when you're talking larger developers, comes into play, a little more than it does, with the smaller guys.
And I think the thing to remember is, you see it typically in projects that aren't annexed. I mean, cities do have a lot of discretion, but at some point you have to be asking the right questions. Despite that discretion, they can't have you do a 10-mile road. I mean, there's still the proportionality of it. Is my project, how am I impacting the city? How am I impacting roads? And how do you make that proportional? So I wanted to kind of transition to fire. So what does all this mean? Get in front of the city and talk to them. Have them explain it to you. Don't take anything on face value because they may not be telling you the truth. And I've done the same thing with fire. That is literally, as soon as I do a pre-app, I call fire. And I have a conversation with the guy that approves deals in whatever cities they are. And I have found 9.9 times out of 10, I'm able to negotiate that stuff.
Don't rely on city staff as a whole and who you're dealing with at planning to negotiate your deals for you with the others.
Because
you be active and have direct contact with each of those, as much as you can. And, they don't necessarily like that, because they like to control that. But it's your right to be able to do that, especially if you're starting to see it go, sideways on some things.
And I think it helps you define that narrative. I talked to fire and he said we could do X, Y, and Z. But when you look at the International Fire Code, I mean, there are things that they are going to go right down. I mean, it is their framework, but a lot of that's negotiable. And almost every time they come up with the ideas on how to deal with it and how you, at a proposed project that overlooked the local police department, and they're afraid of snipers. And I'm like, what? So I literally called the FBI and I said, do you guys have any information on this? No. And we're like, well, what do we do with this? Well, it turned out it was the police department that came up with the idea of, oh, we'll just do the windows a certain way so that someone can't, this, and this. And it was like, oh, okay. But I've had fire do that. Like, oh, no, if you make these private roads, you don't have to do the hammerhead. Why didn't you tell me that? Like, okay, I don't have to do the hammerhead now. That's awesome. I just picked up 2 lots.
Steve.
Yeah, the 3 buckets that I allow the city discretion in is public health and safety, PUD, right? Those, and to talk really quick to the PUD side, the bigger developers, they have PUDs, right? Because they're buying up bigger pieces of dirt. And normally that's why they have, it feels like they have more discretion. Well, it is a lot of times because they're in these master development agreements as well, because that's another level of discretion that they have, right? They have discretion through master development agreement. So you can supersede a development agreement over the code because it does, right? And that's a discretionary angle. So just understand that you have these PUDs, you have a development agreement, and that's their discretion to take on a development agreement with you, right? And then they have code. And that's where their discretion ends. And you have to navigate the public health and safety conversations with the cities. And you have to ask them, okay, you tell me why that's a safety hazard or issue. Like, show me how that's an issue, right? Sometimes we get caught in this idea that we have to be the one to show. Well, it's a 2-part play. They also have to show. So don't feel uncomfortable asking them to show, like he's saying. And when they don't want to show and they're reluctant to show, that's probably another signal. And whatever that is, you need to find the right person to enroll, like he did the FBI. I think that's creative.
It was awesome.
I've never called the FBI to ask them a question.
Well, if
They're
I were
like,
you,
we've-
Steve, I wouldn't, because I think they already have some red flags.
They probably already know.
So let me add on that fire and safety. So back to the fire. What's the first thing you get? You get a letter from the fire chief, usually, telling you everything how it doesn't comply. There's not a single solution in any of that document. That's when I sit down with them as well and say, okay, how do I fix this? And I literally had one, yeah, you can't put fire hydrants there. Okay, where can I put them? Oh, just move it 20 yards to the east. That's the solution? Like, why didn't you put that in the letter? Okay, next one. What, you need a hammerhead. Well, okay, what options do I have? Well, make it a private road. Oh, why didn't you put that in there? But that's just kind of how they do business.
And I want to make sure we touch on, because I know we're getting close on time, but I want to make sure we touch on the Ombudsman process, real quick, because it's something that's a little bit unique to Utah, but it's also kind of a cool thing. And to give you why I think that it could be even more of a powerful and a beneficial thing now, is all you have to do is, if you've watched TV lately, I mean, first off in the news, that the state of Utah has been pushing, and the governor's office has been pushing, we got to figure out this housing situation. We got to have cities stop, getting in the way and have some more conformity, and, even to the extent to where there are threats that, don't make the state take over zoning. And which, could have some benefits, but I mean, that's one of those local control things that, is kind of tough to do. But then again, we're along the Wasatch Front, where I am dealing with so many different jurisdictions, in order to do it. So, but all you have to do is watch, the local or the latest commercials with Governor Cox on it, where he's talking about, they are pushing this big time because they are so concerned about it. Idaho's a little further behind, but there is even talk now, the Idaho legislature now is following Utah's lead a little bit, and there's starting to be talk there about, don't make us take over local zoning. We've got to make sure to take care of this. So the Department of Commerce, which is, state, they have an ombudsman process where you're working with a city and they come up with all of these, things that you think are just aren't reasonable. And we're talking about and have tried to push, get out in front of things. Make sure that you're documenting things. Don't wait until you get, to the very end. And sometimes that ombudsman process can help with that and help drive it. It is not a substitute for you having your own, legal counsel if you need to, but it can make some aspects of that much more economical, because you've got the Department of Commerce who is willing to step in and look at some of these things sometimes, and then give not a legal opinion, not a demand letter to the city, but an advisory opinion as to what's reasonable that the city's asking for and what's not reasonable. And what that does sometimes for you is it can just do some of that, take care of some of formulating those arguments with the city, and how to, I mean, sometimes they don't get, probably paid to a lot, but you basically are getting an outline and a legal brief. Somebody else is doing the research for you, saying, no, this would be a taking in this situation, or we think, blah, blah, blah. And again, they're not your legal counsel, but it really can be a tool that I think could even be more powerful in the future, as things go on, especially as the state allocates resources to figuring out and forcing these cities into situations to where they have to be a little more flexible so that we can, help overcome this housing shortage.
So this is, can I disclose this? Did you hear? Yeah? So Mr. Carroll had a road to nowhere. It's a 12-page opinion from the Ombudsman. It is literally a taking analysis. It's everything that we just covered, right? So it's real. Cities understand it. Cities know it. And it comes out in the opinion, yes, what you are requiring, this road is not, putting in this road is not proportional to this project. And it was literally, I think, 10 lots or something? I mean, it was just a tiny subdivision. And it's a taking if you guys move forward. I don't know, we were hoping to find out how it ended and whether or not.
I know.
Do you know?
How it ended. So it ended the way the individual needed it to end, right? So basically he won out, the ombudsman helped him win out on it. But it was a scenario where they were asking, again, him to upgrade their infrastructure for future needs, not current needs, that the project was not impacting.
So
Had no cause. So what I want to keep outside is the city and the individual per se.
Yeah.
We'll leave them out, but that's really the scenario. When you start to feel like your impact is no longer the conversation, but it's now more about what the city needs, then again, it's a signal for you to start looking at an ombudsman, opinion, which they do give, and there's some value to that. And I'll
yeah, the real question is it too late by the time you get there? Time is money. Time is never on your side on
the
the land deal.
opportunity passed.
Yeah, that's the real question. I don't know how long it takes to get this. But I bring that up because I think in Utah you do have that advantage because of that ombudsman system. They do know about takings. I mean, it is literally a 12-page legal analysis about how this violates the Fifth Amendment of the Constitution of the United States. I mean, it walks through everything. It's beautiful.
And the city attorney, they read those and they're like, okay, I mean, they appreciate that somebody's done the legal analysis for them as well, and they'll follow and double check. But I think one other thing that I just want to point out is, in my capacity when I was chief legal officer for a large investment and development firm, and we were doing deals all over the country. I know that it's tough when it's your deal and you're working with the city of Lehigh or the city of West Jordan or something, and they're asking for, all of these things. Overall, in the global scheme of things, and this doesn't help in that situation, but this is a really easy place to develop, relatively speaking to the rest of the country. We don't have near the red tape here, even at the city level, compared to what you deal with in lots of other places. Idaho's very, very similar and a little more, but you still get these cities, and you get a little bit of the God complex, and and we're going to be able to do this. And it's a lot of everybody speaks, and says the right things, but when push comes to shove, it's like, hey, we think this is a great project. Go next door and do it in Cedar Hills. Keep it in perspective from that standpoint, but also understand that there are resources, to help you with the cities. But a lot of it is just your own knowledge and knowing when to ask questions and demanding that the city, show you what is it that gives you the right to ask for this, or give me your analysis of why you think this is proportionate to the project that we're doing here. And when you start asking those types of questions, that's when you start making more headway.
Yeah, because guess what? The 20 other developers that they talked to yesterday, no one asked that. They all said, what can I give you? Right? Mm-hmm. You don't have to give them everything, and don't. But ask the questions. I think that's kind of the critical takeaway today is it's not a free-for-all. And that's from this Ombudsman.
Developers, we've kind of created the monster, also.
And ask the questions. That's the other thing.
And on the Ombudsman side, if you haven't ever used it, look it up. The process isn't that difficult. And basically what you can do is you can call and set up a time to talk to them. They'll ask for a brief from you after that. They'll review your brief, and you have a second, conversation with them after they've had a chance to review your brief. And then they'll tell you, this is worth us actually spending the time to opine. Then they'll really opine on it. And then at that point, you go and you demonstrate that to the city. If it's written out really well, which it really is, the city council will review that, and then it should open up a door to a happier relational path. If it doesn't still, and it ends up in a litigation, then at that point, there's by law, if you win the litigation, they have to pay everything. So there's some penalty baked in there that's, still, it's not binding. The opine from the state is not binding to the city. And so you just want to be aware of that. The other thing that I really appreciated that I want you guys to understand is like there are some discretionary aspects in it, but they have a limit. It's called code, or it's a PUD, or it's a master development agreement, or it's public health and safety. And where we've gone wrong as a developing crowd is what they're saying is we've been so needing on our timelines within contracts that we will lay down or do whatever we can to get through those timelines, and that has made these cities all the more lost potentially on what is their right versus not their right. Then when I come in, because I end up receiving a bunch of distressed deals on a regular basis because they want my funds to recapitalize their situation. And what I do is I come in, and we had one in Heber that the dude had to foreclose on the developer that overpromised, underdelivered. We had to take over where they were. Part of the problem was that the city had these set expectations that were outside of their jurisdiction. And how hard was that for me to step in and figure that out with the city now? Well, there were these half-baked plans with these expectations, these half-written out master development agreements with these expectations that were way out of bounds. And now I had to try to clean that up. So that's super hard to do. So what we did is Steve came in and he played a hard line, and then Steve had to disappear and everybody had to throw eggs at Steve, right? Everybody, my group basically was like, yeah, Steve's out of control, he's a bull in a china shop, right? That's kind of, and it, from our end, it moved the needle enough and worked, and then I wasn't having to be the front and center anymore. But at some point, our industry has to take a stance and really understand what it means to what the city can and cannot do. And you have to be willing to play that role of what they're saying, where you're not the only one getting asked, but you're also asking them. So if they say prove something and they're making us do stuff to prove it, well, shouldn't it be the same to them equally, that they got to prove it too?
Yeah.
So never be afraid of the, hey, you tell me then why. And secondly, when you get in those conversations, they enroll themselves. And I've literally had an engineer at the city engineer me a plan. He sketched it out, engineered me a plan. That was an enroll on record for me. And I said, okay, cool. So this solves it. He's like, yes. And then we ran into some other quote unquote issues. And I just showed the plan and they're like, oh yeah, that's right. Right? So enroll them. Don't just get bossed. Don't just lay down. Have this be a two-way relationship for sure.
Yeah.
And
So-
someone will make it work. You know, somebody will make the project work at some point. And I do work for a Chapter 11, the Chapter 11 trustee on an unnamed large Chapter 11 bankruptcy golf course residential deal in Summit County. And it will be probably about the third developer that will finally be able to make it pencil after they buy it out of, you know, bankruptcy and doing these things, because the things that the initial developer agreed to, well, it's in Chapter 11 bankruptcy for a reason. And the way some of the things were set up, some of the things that was asked for, I mean, it just didn't work. So it's going to have to all be redone. But it's to a point to where, you know, the county and the city certainly don't want it to fail. And so now all of a sudden they're like, well, yeah, we do kind of have to redo, you know, what our expectations were on this deal. You know, golf course deals in general, it's usually about the third developer finally
like a
that ends up
restaurant.
being able to make it work after it, you know, after everybody's had all the pain. But at some point somebody will make it work. If you have the knowledge and understanding, you know, I think sometimes that the earlier developers could make these things work if they just didn't bow down to the county or the city so much. And that's knowledge. You just have to know what you're working with.
So one last thought, and then thank you for having us. But one last thought. I think the other misstep developers make, give yourself time. If you don't own this, you have it under contract, build in contingencies. Tie it to city approvals, tie it to county approvals, or give yourself some extensions. I think that's the other thing where deals go bad really fast, is they unexpectedly run into this. And guess what? Even if you're proactive, it takes time. And time is not on your side. It takes time to work through these. Give yourself that time. And that's where I see, you know, oh, I got to close in 90 days. You're screwed. Like, if you haven't worked out this issues and you got to close in 90 days. But if you build in those times, just be thinking about that, because a lot of times I see developers it's a bad deal out of the gate. So give yourself time. I think
that's sometimes where the bigger developers, you know, they've got the ability, financial ability to be able to, okay, go ahead and close and figure out then how to get it done. But a lot of developers don't have that ability. So we had talked about that in December when Wade and I presented, you know, build those types of contingencies into your agreements with your buyers. Don't get stuck with something that now all of a sudden it's your problem because you had to close. You know.
Thank you. We're Jeff and I will be around. That's our contact information as part of this group. If you have any questions or
like
follow
I
up,
said, we're in Salt Lake and Boise. Wade's in Boise. I'm in Salt Lake. I just, as a fifth generation Idaho, can't ever get rid of my 208 area code. It's my tie that I just will never give up. But I am in Salt Lake. What's
there
that?
Was no, there was no wife that murdered someone behind the husband?
No, there was no wife and murder.
Not that one.
Not that one. Yeah, just as ugly in many ways.
So I appreciate Wade. I'm gonna take this off of you. Get close. No, I want to appreciate these guys because this is really meaningful information, and truly, don't just feel like you have to feel the code hit you, but engage the code. Engage the code, engage the conversation as a relationship that's two ways. And make sure that, you're like, okay, cool, it's public safety. Why? You don't have to just go like, oh, shoot. I just watched so many people go, oh, shoot, instead of go, why? And a lot of times when you ask the why and there's crickets, it's because there's nothing behind the curtain. And you can be confident in that. As soon as you say why and there is, if there really is something there, you think they're not going to tell you? They're just going to leave you sit? No. There's enough bravado on the city side that they'll tell you. So use that as a sign as well. Is if you ask why and they don't come back with something, that's because they don't have anything, or they don't have something readily available to them. And so keep knocking on it like he did. And at some point, if there's nothing, you'll know there's nothing. And if there is something, you better believe they're going to tell you. So hopefully use that as a gauge as well. Come to our next one. We have a partnership with UVU, and we're going into their programs. I got Greg here with UVU. And so we're going to hold our next one actually at UVU. I hope you can all come. It'll be super cool. So we're going to start igniting some stuff with the students to get them with the current community involved. So if you do go, you can park at the Walmart there on the furthest, what is that, south? Yeah, furthest south side of the parking lot, and there's a tunnel, and you can walk right under, and you're like 2 minutes away from the door, the Keller building there. So super excited for our partnership and relationship we're going to have with UVU. Come to this stuff, and hopefully you guys see the value out of it. And I want you guys to take a moment. We normally feed. We kind of drop the buck there, like literally the buck. We dropped the money on that. So there's no food today. However, take some time to get to know one another. There's some nice players in here. I know a lot of you, and there's some super successful individuals, and there's a lot of deal and money in this room currently. And so I would take the opportunity to get to know them, just as a side note. So thanks for coming. Appreciate it. Come to the next one.